We're going to be talking in the session now about how do we facilitate that horizontal joining up, that collaboration that was mentioned right at the start of the event this morning. In terms of our speakers, I'm delighted that we have here Brian Epley, who is Chief Information Officer at the Department of Commerce in the United States. We've got Eng Tan, who is the Assistant Chief Executive for Economic and National Development Clusters at GovTech in Singapore. We've got Joyce Dimmock, who is the Permanent Secretary at the Security, Home Affairs and Employment Department in Malta. I'm really sorry, I'm not reading this in the correct order. We have got Ben Piercy, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Infinity Quest. And then last but by no means least, we've got Sam Aisan Abdul, who is the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at the Malaysian Communication and Multimedia Commissions. So a fantastic panel with us here today. Brian, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to kick off by asking you a very simple question, really, which is, can you give us some examples from where you sit or previous kind of experience you've got of how you are helping to coordinate digital transformation across some of the organizations that you work with?
Yes, thank you, Siobhan. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you and my panel members and all of you for making a great event. The theme is the core of what I hear in that question. Digital transformation services, but there's a piece in there that I want to highlight, and that's the teams, the coordination. As leaders, I think that we have to focus on, and what I've seen is as a key ingredient to success, is balancing people, process, and technology. As the CIO for the Department of Commerce, I have unique responsibility for 12 agencies with unique and distinct missions. And so I'm trying to highlight for you a very difficult, challenging, but huge opportunity of bringing leaders together in that space to understand what is the common theme that we share in this digital journey, and what are we trying to transform. And I think it's important that as leaders, we don't look at this as a one and done. Transformation is a continuous journey. It's a continuous loop. I've heard that from our colleagues in other sessions. But I think that we have to define what are those common goals that we share, what are the milestones that we're going to achieve together. I said I wanted to highlight teams because it's not just one individual, it's not just one organization. It's the culmination of the team and organizations coming together. It could be one organization, but it could be the elements of that organization. It could be the business side of the house, your CFO. It could be the chief data officer. It should be all of the above, but it needs to be the business and the mission. So I view that, and my success has been leading fusion teams or integrated product teams to understand, define what that common goal is and how we're going to proceed in those. And then developing an ongoing continuous loop that includes feedback internally and externally, and a broad set of framework that is going to be expansive as we get that feedback and we make accomplishments where we have to course correct. That's what keeps us on track towards success.
Brilliant, thanks Brian. So I think really setting the scene well there with some things that will resonate with a lot of people in the audience. I think the importance of leadership and of building those more kind of multidisciplinary, cross-departmental teams. So you might pick something from one department, maybe or organization, something from another. The real importance of defining the common goals, though. So I think too often, wherever we sit in the public sector, we're working in siloed kind of objectives and priorities. So trying to broaden that out, really important. And then that sense that this is a continuous journey. It's not one and done, as you said, like this is a continuous process. Thanks so much, Brian. A great way to kick us off. Eng Peng, I'm going to come to you. If you could tell us a little bit, and we often look to Singapore as kind of a shining light in terms of what's working well on public service delivery. So have you got any good examples you can share with us of where you've had, helped to facilitate this cross-departmental working?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to be on this panel. It's indeed a privilege. As many of you know, Singapore is a very small city-state country, right? It's only 6 million people, one level of government. So you would think that in a small country and one level of government, things ought to be a lot simpler. But I have to say that even with decades of digitalization, we still see challenges and new lessons learned every day in trying to work across agencies. And what I want to do this afternoon is essentially to share a very simple example of how we organize ourselves to deliver government to business licensing applications. Because we thought we want to illustrate with a single example to say that if we are determined to work across agencies, indeed we can improve things. So started in 2018 using F&B industry as a sector. We undertook this MVP journey to discover what businesses would like government to help them in their onboarding, registration stage, in their growing stage. And over that 6 years, we have learned many lessons, and today we are happy that we are able to put at least 40% of the government to business licensing applications into one single portal. Because you think about it, if you're starting out a business, it's important that you focus on growing the business, less than searching how you want to deal with different parts of the government. And when I researched it, I sort of discovered myself that actually it's not easy to be a businessman, even in a small country like Singapore. You have to first find which agency to deal with, depending on the premise that you're setting up the business. You've got to go to different agencies to get the correct permit. Then you've got to get fire safety approval. You've got to get food approval. And if you want to sell liquor, you will get liquor licenses, etc., etc. So you can imagine that the businessmen actually have a lot to contend with. And this is not counting that if you have workers, you need to settle their provident fund requirements. There's goods and services tax registration that you need to do, countless of them. So over time, we find that to help businesses navigate this, it's better that we work across the different parts of government agencies. We encourage them to settle their back end, but we do the front end for them, so that the businesses just go to the Go Business website, and you get to register it across. But then what about businesses that are in the growing stage? Then your needs are different. Then we look at how do we incentivize them to invest in workers' training? How do we encourage them to take advantage of different government incentives that help them grow their businesses? And over time, we took a very user-centric approach and working with agencies internally, breaking down boundaries, establishing the technical standards so that systems can talk to each other. Both the front end, the back end can talk to API so that the applicants could enjoy the benefits of reduced data entry and faster processing time. But it certainly took a long way, in that 6 years to come to just 40% of the licenses. We still got a long way more to go. But we thought this is a useful example to say that if we can set our minds together, I think many of us can do it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eng Peng. I think it makes us all feel better that even in Singapore, you're still having challenges. It's not smooth sailing all the way. I like the fact that you said you focus on the user needs, so what business is needed in the first place, and then you create that single portal for them. So you're doing all the hard work and the joining up behind the scenes in government, but making the product for the user as simple and easy as possible. And then from that, once you've got people using that, then you can also direct them then to other government services. So taking that kind of incremental approach. And as you said, going back to, I think, what Brian was saying, it's a continuous journey. It's not a simple and quick fix. Thank you so much. Ben, I'm going to come to you, ask you a slightly different perspective, because obviously you sit outside government working with a host of different agencies and departments. What would you say they're doing well when it comes to kind of horizontal working, and where would you say some of the biggest areas for improvement remain?
Well, I'll build a little bit on what Brian was mentioning earlier. I think regardless of whether it's using like a credential-based approach like ours, or the existing way that data is shared between organizations, the notion that you have to have interdisciplinary teams pulled together to decide on how that's going to happen is absolutely critical. And I think, at least from the various organizations that we've worked with at the municipal, the provincial, and now the federal level, we've seen that, and I think that's happening in a reasonable way. Where I think some of the struggles are, and you know, depending on the type of use case you're dealing with, it's there's always kind of friction at various points and things that get in the way. But I think they all kind of boil back to this notion of data sharing. And I think that's probably not news to anybody here. Like it's not a telecom issue. It's not a matter of getting bits from point A to point B. It's a question of governance. Do you know the nature of that data? Is it protected B? Is it secret? Is it something that needs to have a specific cybersecurity attention paid to it? Is it something that there's specific legislation around? Is that something that you have to do in terms of getting consent from citizens or from end users? So there's all this surround around the data. I was speaking to a lady earlier this morning who said, we were talking about AI, and she's like, well, I don't know how I'm going to deal with AI. We've got enough problems, and our hands full dealing with the data we've got, right, and the relationships we've got. So, so I think that'll get smoothed out over time, I think. And I think, you know, I come at it from a digital credentials perspective. And what I'm seeing is really a very exciting way of changing the channel on the way that data is shared now, where because we have well-known and well-defined roles and well-known and well-defined protocols and standards between, you know, the data formats and the crypto and all that, it becomes a much easier turning of the crank to get these kinds of cross-organization use cases off the ground, right? So I'm quite bullish about that, and I think that's something that the public sector and in time the private sector as well is really going to be able to latch onto and drive some real change. Like everybody's day-to-day life can change as a result. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So some positives around, you're seeing good things happening maybe on getting those multidisciplinary teams together, but still quite a lot of work to do. And this definitely came up in the sessions this morning on sharing data and being able to share data. And data is so much a foundation for everything else that we want to do. So a lot of room for improvement there. Thanks so much. Joyce, I'm going to come to you. Just a sense of what's going on in Malta and hearing what we've heard already. Do you think some of the barriers maybe to working horizontally, are they more around the kind of culture and people, or are they around the systems, the data, the kind of, you know, silos that we have in place? Where do you see the biggest barriers being?
Well, I think that in our case, it's a combination of both, actually. And if you will allow me, I'll just give a couple of sentences about Malta, because it is not as well known as Singapore. It's also an island with a population of just over 500,000. So as you can imagine, it's quite small, and the size works for us and against us sometimes. So in the case of this horizontal collaboration and data sharing, the culture is a bit of a setback with certain entities which are a bit more archaic than others. But overall, with the right legislation, the right technology, and the right infrastructure, we are managing to get this horizontal collaboration. I will quote an example from my ministry, because we are the owners of the national identity. And we have legislation now which makes it obligatory for every entity to link to a person register, which has the one single truth of every Maltese citizen. And this will allow our service delivery agency, the front-facing service.gov, and the different entities to access one point of truth in real time and get the updated data all the time. It will minimize data use, but it will also reduce the need for citizens to provide their data time and time over again. This new technology that is being installed in this identity agency that we have, it has made it obligatory for all entities to be interoperable with this one-person register, so that we will finally achieve the once-only principle. We are also integrating this with the horizontal front-facing service.gov entity, which is the customer care side of people facing difficulties to interface with government and also to get simple, straightforward services. So we hope that by the end of March, the technology will all be in place and several entities will already be linking. And that can be done because we have a small size, but it is also the result of decades of transformation digitally, because the services actually linking to this person register are mostly all digitized. Now, if I may, culturally, it doesn't mean that every person will go digital. We have established a number of hubs to cater for the gap of people who have lower digital skills or who are a bit skeptical. We hope to achieve a higher access digitally and look forward to enhancing our services through going digital.
Brilliant, thank you. So really interesting to see that the national ID program that you have is kind of driving that cross-departmental work. And I think picking up on what all of our other speakers have said, at the heart of that is putting the user at the center, and this, what lots of governments around the world are trying to do, that your citizens should only have to provide their data once, should only have to tell government once, and then that gets shared behind the scenes. So that's really driving that change. But also you're making an important point there, that not everybody is coming on this digital journey. We need to make sure that everybody is included as we do all of this, and there has to be stuff put in place for workers to have the skills, but also the citizens to be able to access all of these digital services. Thank you so much, Joyce, giving us the perspective from Malta. We've got one more left, and then I'm coming out to the audience, so have your questions ready. But Sam, in Malaysia, so how good are you at doing this cross-departmental, cross-government working?
I have to say it's a challenge, because Malaysia is a country that has got about 14 states coming together. And to engage my organization, which is a commission, and we have to engage all of them from a state, federal, and local authority level. So we find that without a few common things that we must put in place, like for example, we've got to be walking in their shoes. What do they face when it comes to digital transformation? Not everybody's on the same journey. At federal, maybe it's a lot easier, but local authorities, they have budget issues, process issues, and many other issues. And also, COVID has taught many things, and one of them is that don't do things the same way again. So we always use this example where let's open up, let's engage more. We don't need to do the same way again as before. Communication, effective communication, to communicate more than you have done before, so that then you can try to paint a picture of what the end goal can be. So digital transformation is as much as about people and it's about tools. And last but not least, we find that by having standards in place that runs alongside the effort of digital transformation, it helps in terms of making sure that adoption of new technologies or any new applications fall in place as quickly as possible.
Thank you. So you bringing in some new barriers there. I think sometimes budgets and resources might get in the way of kind of cross-departmental working. Something I think in Canada you will have the provinces as well as the kind of national level, so working across different hierarchies and different geographical areas as well can sometimes be a barrier. People having different skills in the different parts of the system that you mentioned there. And again, the importance of communication and understanding where people are at, whether it's your employees or whether it's your citizens, understanding where they're at, all really important, and then bringing in standards there. So thank you to all of you for setting the scene. We've heard lots of the issues around what's working well, what isn't working so well. Yes, we've got a question at the back there. I'm really conscious, I've chaired quite a few sessions today, I've not had a question yet from this side of the room, so I'm going to be looking to this side of the room as well later, but we will take this question at the back there and then be ready with your next question. If you could put your hand up again. Oh, you've got the mic. Thanks so much.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you all for coming and sharing your experiences so that we can understand how to work together and across teams. I'm curious, I hear a conflict, and I'd like to hear from all of you how those are resolvable. When we want to approach with a human-centric design principle and engage in an agile manner to actually get a project complete, but then also engage all stakeholders, make sure everyone is heard and that all needs are considered. How do we meet in the middle to make sure that we haven't the problem of too many cooks in the kitchen, where everybody's competing needs and interests and realities simply bog it down so that a project isn't agile, never gets accomplished, never gets delivered, and that people lose interest or disengage? How do you balance these sort of agile but all engaged needs?
That's a great question. So how do you balance making sure your users are involved, making sure all of your different departments are involved with actually moving ahead and delivering at pace? How do you balance that up? Brian, we haven't heard from you before. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, happy to. That's a softball question, right? No. There's a lot to unpack there. I think to keep it at a high level that answers the question, but keeps you all, I think, engaged and captive in the discussion, it really comes down to, in my opinion, true leadership. If you look at the three principles of transformation, people, process, and technology, they're all on an individual journey. We're talking about different systems. We haven't gotten into it. Tan touched on a couple examples that were license and business related, many of you can relate to, but I think the reason I highlight true leadership is because we're all faced with competing priorities, whether it's budget, resources, training, skill. You're talking about approach, methodology, human-centered design, agile. All of these, components have to be baked into the recipe for success. And I emphasize teams. Whether you're working internally in your organization or across many departments, you have to understand what the core requirements are. But I also use the team analogy because there are strengths, and I leverage centers of excellence. You have to play to those strengths. So rather than compete with that and that conflict, you're able to actually push and motivate and empower individuals to take an existing success on that bigger, broader journey that we all may undertake. And what I mean by centers of excellence, it could be existing shared services. It could be a modified shared service that we're going to bake in new requirements in the United States, as well as many of your nations were faced with new cybersecurity, zero trust credentials. These are examples of where you might just be making some, I'll call it course corrections. But leadership is at the core of, I think, the conflict that you highlight in your question. And it really requires a team, and you have to bring everyone to understand what it is we're focused on and how are we going to be successful together.
Thanks, Brian. Ben, you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that one as well. I think it's really important when you've got these multi-department, multidisciplinary teams that what you don't try to chew off too much. You're not trying to boil the ocean here. You're not trying to take on a project that's just going to do a massive sweep. What you need to, I think, in order to sort of accommodate the kinds of conflict or agile process that you're referring to, is to make sure that you can achieve success early on something that's quite within range, and then keep building on top of that over and over and over again, right? So I think that's what we've seen. You need to start with something that's digestible and manageable, and then build from there. That's the word we've seen.
Thanks. Peng, do you want to come in? Yep.
Maybe I'd like to add on to the point that I think Brian shared. I think I certainly agree that I think leadership is of paramount importance. I think many of us, at least based on what I heard today, have common whole of government digital visions. I'm very sure in that vision is this thing about wanting to serve citizens and businesses well. It's about user centricity. But once you unpack that at the doing level, I think there's different agencies, different processes, different systems that get in the way. So I think this is where leadership is really challenged on an everyday basis. How do you orchestrate to overcome the differences, both in operations, both in technology? And in our own little experience, we find that once we have settled the business ownership, which is important, in somewhere in the government, somebody must own that initiative. Then the next thing is useful to have an orchestrator, typically one of the more equipped technical agencies that help you unpack the difficulties at the doing level, and then so that the interagencies collaborations can truly work. This is found to be very useful because not every agencies have invested in the internal capability to be able to execute the common joint-up services seamlessly. So if there is somebody that come and lend a helping hand, it will greatly facilitate the process.
Thanks, Eng. Right, coming back to the audience for the next question, and I'm looking over this side of the room again. Somebody's got to be the first person in that block to put their hands up for a question over there. No, is there a... No, right, I'm going to come back here to the other bit of the room. No, well, I've got, oh, yeah, sorry, we have a question over there. It's really hard to see. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Actually, I have a question. Thank you. My question is, how do you balance privacy with the predictive and interactive single digital persona that many panelists have prescribed as a solution to de-siloing many government services, specifically for businesses, but could also be for citizens on a personal level? Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a question, I think, about digital credentials, kind of the idea of having one digital ID. How do you ensure that you maintain privacy around somebody's data where you're sharing that data then with so many different departments and agencies? Joyce, I'll come to you first.
We are part of the European Union, and both locally and at European level, we have the Privacy Directive. It's the law that prohibits the sharing of data unless it's authorized by the owner and also necessary. So once you give your data to a government department or a government entity, then you are asked to give consent for the data to be stored by that entity and shared only for the delivery of that service. The new person register will now have the consent side of it for the data to be shared between the government departments that you are requesting a service from. It will not be shared indiscriminately. It is only when a citizen requests a service from government that his data will be automatically accessed by the department or entity providing that citizen with the service. The rules are quite strict, and in fact it is one of the barriers to this collaboration that we have found, because certain entities have more sensitive data, like health and financial services and taxation, and they were quite reluctant and had to be quite reassured that legally they are being covered. So there is a legal framework that describes how the data can be shared and the rights of the data owner as well. It is not an easy task, and it took several years to get here because the trust element was very important. We cannot have a system that is not trusted. So that took some time to build, even intergovernment, horizontally between departments. Because surprisingly enough, it's one government, but some entities were more reluctant to share the data than others. So it was a work that needed a lot of collaboration. We had structured onboarding, a lot of communication, and we asked each entity to assign a systems administrator for the contact to be through an authorized person who is knowledgeable about the data being collected by the entity and being inputted into the main register.
And it is interesting how different countries are being able to progress different rates on a digital ID or a national ID program, and that quite often does link to levels of trust between the citizen and the government. Peng, in Singapore you have a digital ID scheme, is that right? So do you have concerns around privacy? To what extent do the public challenge the idea of having a digital ID scheme?
Yeah, I recognize that I think every country works differently. So in Singapore, we do have what we call the National Registration Identity Card. So in a way, the citizens are accustomed to having a credential that is issued by the state. So that was a pre-digital era. So in our digital form of it is under the National Digital Identity Program, NDI program, where we now issue what we call SingPass accounts on a mobile credential to the citizens. And we now have about 70% of our citizens owning that. And besides using it to transact with government, you can in fact use it also as a credential in place of the plastic card, that's the NRIC. Increasingly, we also find that it's very useful for us to extend digital services to the private sectors. So some of the financial institutions use it as a second factor authentication. Fund houses, insurance company use it to reduce lock-in time, and even more importantly, reduce the so-called KYC process. Because behind that digital identity is then our ability to harvest different parts of government agencies' data on consent basis by the individual. So that if you are applying for a new bank account, the bank knows certain data about you authorized by the applicant without you having to fill in and without having to check and double check that your data indeed is true. So I think that's how we built around the digital credential in Singapore.
Thanks. Next question. Who? Just seeing, yes, so there's, thank you. Yeah, please do wave your hand around like that. There's a lady at the back there, thank you. There we go, microphone coming, thanks.
Perfect, thank you very much. I'm actually going to ask an odd question. I just want to know how you guys ensure that all your stakeholders have the same understanding of how to drive a successful outcome. Because I know that if you have multiple disciplinary teams, sometimes all they want to do is just deliver on a product, but that doesn't necessarily bring about successful outcome. So I'd like to know your perspective.
And when you're talking stakeholder, are you talking internal to government? So all the different, yeah. Okay, great question. So Sam, I'll start with you. How do you make sure that everyone you're working with across government understands the ultimate aim and not just their little piece of it?
Yeah, I think that's a terrific question because I find that in many of the projects that we have back in Malaysia, without that element of leadership that Brian mentioned, then everything goes haywire. I mean, there are blueprints and plans and project management, but there should be somebody within there that thinks outside the box, or sometimes even people say that you should think without the box, so that then you put everybody on the same page, have empathy, understand that they're all at different parts of the journey of digital transformation, paint a picture of what the end goal is supposed to be, recognize that everybody's resources are all at different stages, but there should be one or perhaps a group of people that holds the ultimate goal of what that project is. And I suppose along the way, we have this idea that it's a win-win situation where for them to be on board to catch up on the progress of what is supposed to be, we've got to understand what makes them a winner as well, so that they are on board.
Thank you. So really the importance of governance and leadership, having that real clear picture, which is I think what Brian started with, a clear picture of what the ultimate objective is, but also understanding how their bit does fit into that, so it's a win-win for them. Brian, did you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I just wanted to add to that. In my earlier comment, this is where the feedback loop is critical. It starts with setting a clear vision and the collective goals, across this team landscape as we begin this journey, but it's not one and done. It's continuous, it's ongoing. And that feedback loop will tell us, are we aspiring, are we achieving our goals, and is our environment changing? Is the customer experience changing? Is the data set changing? Whether it's privacy or cybersecurity or other variables that are coming into play, we have to be nimble and agile and be able to respond to that. And that's why that feedback loop, in my opinion, is so critically important.
Does anybody else want to come in on this particular question? Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I guess I'll just reiterate and agree with the notion that leadership and communication is absolutely critical to deliver that message throughout the organization. There's no question about that. But also there are structural things, and we've seen some of that in Canada as well with the creation of the new Ministry of Citizen Services, right? So there's structural things as well that can be put in place to make sure that the message is delivered, that it's the citizen experience. It's the citizen that matters. Like they are the center of it, right? And we can all kind of get behind, rallying behind that point and making sure all the process delivery that we have is targeted at improving that.
Thanks. Is there also, I've got a question. So I joined the civil service in the UK in many, many years ago, 1996. We were talking about joined up government then. We're still talking about trying to join up government now. So this is not happening quickly. And one of the biggest factors, I think, is the way departments are funded. So they're funded in silos. The money runs in silos. Should we be thinking about issues like that? Should we be thinking fundamentally about the way government is organized to change the way that people work, to break out of those silos? Any thoughts on that? Brian.
I'll weigh in, Siobhan. I'll take the bait. I think it's a rich discussion. Some examples that I've had success with would be, I'll call them strategic sourcing, whether it's licensing. If you look at the whole of government and you're able to take advantage of the economies of scale, that's a start. Because resources are constrained, budget cuts, competing priorities, we have to be creative in terms of how we're going to do this. And I think we have to take that broader view. But it's not just strategic sourcing or being creative. And I think your question, Siobhan, about the budget line, these are individual channels. And we in the United States government have a CIO council that brings those leaders together and understand what that whole of challenges are. We don't necessarily share the funding streams, but I think if we were able to open that aperture and understand where our priorities land from a funding standpoint and then align that with the challenges that we share, we're able to accomplish things better together.
Joyce, and then we'll do Joyce and then Peng In. Joyce.
The issue with budget items is the accountability element by a line department, which is very traditional to government and which we all, like to keep a hold on somehow so that we get the autonomy to decide on what happens with our budgets. But a good example that worked in our country is also the CIO Forum, who have this holistic plan across government about CAPEX and OPEX for digitalization and transformation. And then that component gets assigned to the line ministry, but is earmarked and planned for even a consolidated, integrated system, for example. And we have found that it works. It allows room for the vertical, silo-ish initiatives, but it also makes it an obligation to contribute from your budget to a system that you're going to be part of, which is across government. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Thanks. Sorry, Peng In, you want to come in?
Yes. I wanted to pick up the point that how potentially a transformed financing framework can help technologies. Because as more of us undertake a product-centric approach in developing our systems and services, actually what we need is not the CAPEX, OPEX. We typically have high CAPEX and then much lower OPEX kind of financing framework. But we will need to move towards getting the financial resources almost on a continuous basis. And this, for many governments, at least where I come from, is still innovation. We haven't really got to the stage of getting it right. We are still thinking through how we can balance between the control and allowing the tech side of the house to have continuous resourcing. But I want to pivot from financing to talk about another important aspect, which is policy. I think Brian spoke about a very important operations, technology, and people. Fully agree with that. I think there's one more dimension that can help us, which is really whether the policy can be simplified to enable more admin data to be unlocked and for sharing across agencies. And then even doing away with some of the work. The example I cited for even simple things like licenses. Why do you need the businesses to renew every year? If you have been approving this license for the last 18 years, almost at 100% basis. So these are some of the needs. This is a very simple example, but once you are prepared to shift left, the policy guys can help the tech guy in very, very big ways.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Yes, we have a hand up here, and I'm just going to shout it because I can't see very well. So if you've got your hand up as well next time, please do shout out as well. But question here, thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Ratib Abir. I'm from ISET, Innovation, Science and Economic Development, Canada. I have one question in terms of digital technology as a service that citizens use across countries. Previously, I worked a little bit on Canada, EU, and United States, and also Singapore. There was one challenge in terms of a standard, how these technology used across, for example, if I use an app developed in Canada, in Toronto, for example, how I can use this in Europe, US, or other countries. Is there any we got one challenge that, for example, EU was much loved blockchain, but there was a little bit different in US to kind of accept it, and Canada was in between. Is there any development in terms of one standard to kind of use? Because some of these apps, for example, in financial industry, it doesn't work. For example, it developed in Europe, but you can't use it in Canada or US, or from US to Canada. Is there any development in that area?
Okay, thanks. So in terms of facilitating kind of cross-border working, so not necessarily just within a country, but you're talking now internationally, should we be thinking more about standards, kind of common standards, so that we can work more together? Okay.
Yeah, and also it's, of course, that every country develop its also business aspect of that as well.
Okay,
yeah.
So we're going even further now in terms of horizontal working. To what extent do you think we're making progress on cross-national standards so that we can be sharing more data, we can be kind of helping people that travel around maybe so that they use the same systems wherever they're traveling in the world? Who would like to talk about this one? Ben?
I can speak a little bit to this. You know, in the digital credential space, there's been several different kind of technology approaches that have been evolving over the last little while. And you would get situations very much like what you're talking about. You've got a credential that's issued in using one technology stack that it's not going to work in this other jurisdiction because they've chosen different technology to make different technology and policy choices. And so there is a lot of work being done in the various standards bodies to arrive at this global interoperability. And we're seeing some of that with the W3C. We're seeing that in the ISO world as well with the various formats. And we're seeing in Europe, I think they have a framework that allows for electronic driver's licenses and another format that allows for selective disclosure of information. In the US, they've chosen a different subset. But there are ways and there are systems that can actually help communicate across those things. So interoperability across, at least in the digital credential realm, is absolutely top of mind. It's getting a lot. It's starting to crystallize now more than it was even a few years ago. So I think the outlook looks pretty good on the industry itself kind of rallying around a certain core subset of technologies that can make that happen.
Yeah, Joyce and then Sam.
Not from a technology perspective, but from a user point of view. In Europe, we have the single digital gateway. Every member state is obliged to have a connection on this platform, which is the single digital gateway, to enable education, travel, the movement of persons across the European territory. It was very challenging, and we're just getting there, not just us. And then from another aspect, it's the border control systems. The interoperability aspect there is massive. We are at the point of launching this new system this November, and it may be delayed because the different technologies in different countries linking to this one central platform is proving to be very, very challenging and very costly. So that's from a user perspective.
And you can start to imagine, we're talking about how difficult it is just to get cross team working within a department, let alone cross-department working within a country, and now we're talking about cross-country working as well, so lots of challenges there. Sam, this is probably the last word to you because we're out of time.
Yeah, so I probably say that local participation, industry players and government is essential to set up that local standards ecosystem, and also to use international platforms where possible so that you can push up that particular agenda where you want inter-country or region participation in the standards. So I find that public sector alone is not enough. It needs to have some industry collaboration when it comes to building up either local standards or global and regional standards.
Brilliant. Sadly, we are flashing red down here, so please join me in a warm round of applause for our fantastic panel there. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you again for all of your questions.